Okay, in this particular study, the researchers were interested in looking at student presentations. In particular, they wanted to explore whether a newer approach called the Pecha model was more effective than a traditional PowerPoint presentation. Now, in order for you to engage in this research prediction, which basically asks you, do you think the Pecha presentation approach worked better than the traditional PowerPoint presentation approach, you'll need to at least know what Pecha is. So the original Pecha model is for an individual presenter to create PowerPoint slides that have images or graphics on them, and they are only allowed to create 20 slides, and they have 20 seconds per slide. Now, in this particular study, you'll notice it says a modified approach. So they were not quite as rigid in terms of how long a student needs to spend on each slide, but they did make sure that students kept to that 6 minutes and 40 seconds a total mark, which is what it counts to if you do 20 slides times 20 seconds each. So it was keeping them confined to that, and they did let them do it in a small group as well. So now that you know a little bit about what Pecha is, you can make your research prediction. Now we're going to shift into understanding the article, and then when we're finished, you're going to go back and dive into the questions related to critically thinking about this research study, and also the questions related to building your information literacy skills. So let's go ahead and get started and look at the article itself. As you can see, the article begins with an abstract, which is always important because it provides you with a summary of what happened. And you can see here they're talking about the Pecha model. They're talking about how they collected data from marketing student presentations, and there were two different approaches that were used, the Pecha and the traditional PowerPoint presentations. So let's take a closer look now at the introduction. As you know, the introduction sets the stage for why this study is important and what this particular study is going to do to add to the literature. So here in the beginning, you'll see that they're going to target specifically marketing graduates because this article is targeting the business students, marketing ones in particular. So they're talking about why, presentations are valuable, what kinds of skills marketing students need in the business world. Then they're also introducing the concept of Pecha, providing you with a little history of where it, originated, and some more details about what the approach really is. The next section really talks about the need to innovate student presentations. So it talks a little bit about the gap between the skills that students are graduating with and the skills that they need as viewed by their employer. So here, for instance, you can see students were not as well prepared as they should be for professional presentations in class, and that obviously is going to translate into the world of work too. So the rationale and the need to come up with some strategies that better assist students at doing presentations is kind of outlined in this section here. Now, the next section tells you about how the Pecha model was modified in this particular study. So over here, you'll see that there's good narrative about that, but they also put it into this really nice chart here. So table 1 talks about the differences between the original model and the modified version that's being used in this particular study. You can see some of the key differences are the number of presenters. The original version only allowed for one presenter, and this was done more in a group format. The original model was very rigid in terms of how many seconds per slide, 20 seconds, and in this model it was variable. However, the time on task was the same for both. So here's the section where you can kind of better understand what the Pecha model was in this particular study so that when you're interpreting the results, you know what that means. Okay, so we're going to scroll down here. The next section is the assessment, and this is technically providing you with the method, although they're not labeling it this way. Most research studies will label it as the method, but this particular study is calling it assessment. But you can see when you dive into this, the specifics within this area, it is really providing you with the methodology. So this first paragraph talks about how the Pecha presentation style was used in 3 different marketing classes. And then if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see here there was also a more traditional group presentation in 3 different marketing classes. So all of the courses required a group project and presentation. Half were using the Pecha and half were using the traditional model. So now when you scroll down a little bit further, you'll see that the students were asked to also complete questionnaires after doing their presentation, and those questionnaires really focused on a variety of things, including how well they think they did on their presentation, how others did, anticipated grades, how much time they spent practicing, things of that nature. Here in this paragraph, you'll see how many students participated in the research study. So you'll see 132 actually responded to the survey, but only 114 were usable because some of them had incomplete data. When you look at the breakdown, they tell you here that 68 of those 114 were from the PechaKucha classes and 46 were from the traditional PowerPoint presentation classes. So now they are shifting into the results. Again, they're not labeling it such, so sometimes you have to dig around a little bit to find it. But here you can see that they're immediately talking about the results and how they addressed it. So students had to respond on the 7-point Likert scale. When we look over here at the differences, we will see that there were in fact differences. More specifically, those who were assigned to the PechaKucha model rated their performance stronger than students who were in the traditional PowerPoint presentation model. You can see here M is the mean. So on that 7-point Likert scale, the PechaKucha group had an average of 4.96, almost 5, whereas the students in the traditional model only graded themselves at a 4.1. So that's a pretty significant difference. In addition, I should say, the PechaKucha group also had stronger ratings of their relative group performance, 5.1, versus those who were in the traditional approach at a 4.26. So if we scan here, it's also interesting. They measured a variety of other things, such as some other concerns, that anxiety and things that could play into the model, and they did not find that those really significantly impacted the results of the study. So that's kind of important for you to know as well. Now, one of the other areas that I think is kind of important is how much time did the students spend in the, in terms of preparing. So you can see here they compared the amount of presentation practice. We're just going to scroll down a little bit more so it's more center on the screen for you. When considering the number of hours, the PechaKucha presentation style did spend many more hours on the project than others. On average, for instance, the PechaKucha students spent more than 2 hours, where on average the traditional folks spent an hour or less. So in order to prepare for this PechaKucha style, you are seeing that students are spending more time on task, really engaged in the preparation process. So it's not really shocking then that the initial findings that they, thought they performed better would, be true, because obviously the more you prepare for a presentation, probably the better it is. You'll see here they also shared some, kind of the open-ended highlights with you, so you can kind of get, some of the, student perspective on it as well. And that adds some, kind of qualitative components or just kind of other twists to the data, really adding some more personal meaning to it. So now the last part of the article is talking about, okay, so if this is the case, what are some ways that faculty can really use this? And we know that there are, many strategies that faculty use to help students learn the skills. But here in this section, what the researchers are doing is they're trying to talk a little bit about how they could do it, and they're emphasizing the importance of maybe modifying it a bit, which is what they did here. So maybe the 20 slides, 20 seconds is a little too rigid and may not work, but by kind of modifying those courses, the guidelines for those course presentations, you can really help students do well with it. Helping students understand what PechaKucha was a challenge, so the authors kind of identify that. So there weren't that many examples, but what they did was they, were asked students if they would be willing to videotape them and use those as a resource. So basically what the authors are doing is providing faculty with some ideas about how to best utilize this approach. And then finally, of course, you always want to think about what can I do next? So what's the next step? And in this last section, you'll see that the authors are providing some suggestions about next steps for faculty and even potentially researchers to further investigate. And then, of course, you have the references at the end. So hopefully this overview helps you understand the nature of the study. I encourage you to go back, read it much more carefully and in more depth, and then go back and look at the critical thinking and information literacy skills component.